So everyone knows the recording has been started.
Hi, everyone. Waiting to see if there's anyone else. Jenny, are we good?
Yep, we've got what we've got.
Okay.
I imagine it looks like, oh, there's Alicia. Here.
That is her note taker again. So
That's her
we
note taker.
might.
And-
That isn't
Okay, well, maybe she'll come in here and we can. Oh,
you.
come on in. Someone there? Come on in. Hi. Sorry, the handful of
Wasn't being
coffee.
shy, just struggling.
Yeah.
Do you want me to leave her note taker in the?
I wonder if we can, I might try to email her. Why don't we take her note taker out of the meeting if we can and try to connect with her via email? One of us can do that here while we started. She's not here, is she? No, she's not.
She's not.
I'll see if I can find her email address on here.
I think
You got it handy.
Find her.
Have you started recording?
Yes, I
Good.
started the
Okay,
recording.
thank you.
Great. Well, I'm going to kick off the meeting to say thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. We have a smaller group of people here today, and I think for the most part, all of us have know each other well at this moment. So I'm not going to do introductions, and we have a big bunch of work ahead of us. So if it's okay, I'd like to just jump in unless, is there anyone on the call who does not know somebody else who's on the call? No, great, awesome. So I'm sure, or I hope that you all saw the very large working document that was emailed to you. This was a compilation of the things that were brought up in our meetings, and certainly not an endorsement of any one thing or another thing, but just a list of the items that were called out as being important considerations as we move forward with the Act 133 working group. So, we clearly never took a formal vote or, or even an informal vote on any of these topics. These were things that came up in our discussion. Some of them we talked about extensively. Some of them we didn't talk about as extensively. Some of them were passing comments, but seemed important enough to include on this big list. I think it's important to remember, and we have a good example of it today. Not every meeting had full representation. So when some topics were taken up, we didn't hear everybody's perspective about the topics. And the goal here is to go through this list, to talk about it, to add if there are things that are missing. We want to make sure that we hear from you if you think something is missing from the list in any particular category. And then for us to, flesh out any significant concerns, hesitations, any significant support, and then or things that we should all discuss before we come to a decision-making process. The decision-making process that we are contemplating doing is having the assigned working group members be sort of the participatory members of the decision-making. So for instance, for the Secretary of State, we have one voice, and that will probably be me. But it will not be Sean and Kelly and Jenny. So the decision making, and then we will come to a sort of thumbs up, thumbs to the sideways, thumbs down. So not an official vote, because the topics are not really of that nature. But then we will be able to adequately represent in the report that this topic has substantial support from the working group, and these were the concerns that were raised. Whatever the topic is, we'll be able to reflect both the support and the concerns that were raised. You know, the majority of these topics are not something that this working group can proclaim. They are things that are policy changes or legislative changes, and are essentially asks for the legislature or another body to do. But I do think the intent and the goal of the working group is to provide strong recommendations to the legislature and to everybody who's reading the report of things that could be permissible under the law now, that could be more clear and more accessible to communities so that they can provide more accessible meetings and elections, or changes that the law need to be made to the law. So with that being said, I'd like to start with moving through the goals for best practices, because I think that is a space that that we will have the most alignment, and then work through the other considerations. Kate, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to reiterate something I and others have been asking for the last 5 or 6 meetings, which is imperative to actually even go to this part for me. And it's when we talk about the law, right? Like, what law or laws are we talking about? And I'm feeling really frustrated that despite the ongoing requests, the ongoing offers, that there would be a list of laws, we still don't have that. And so for me, that feels absolutely the underpinning of the entire report. And half of our charges, we need to actually outline what laws are we talking about: federal civil rights law, state civil rights law, 2 titles of the Constitution. And then from time to time, there's just banter about these ubiquitous laws that could be anywhere from 4 to 60, I think was shared at one point, that prohibits hybrid. So with a report that is so important when it comes to giving the legislature the list of what needs to be changed or what fits under current law, I don't know how to do that without knowing having even a list of what these laws are. So I just wanted to check and see is that something that's going to be provided to us, and if so, when?
Yeah, I know that in terms of the elections law, the elections division is working on that. In terms of federal law, I have asked, perhaps not clearly enough, that disability rights helps us with that, the federal laws and the ADA, but I can make that more clear request. I think Laura was asking for that last week or last meeting. And in terms of open meeting law, that law, I mean, we have a ton of trainings on our website, Kate. I think the law is a relatively short one. We can certainly provide the law to you for open meeting, but if you have more questions about it, we have a lot of guidance on our website.
So this is, just to be clear, this isn't a Kate question for curiosity. This is, in order to frame the report to the legislature, we need to say, before we even get to voting on do we agree that this is allowable under current law, we all in this room need to understand what are the current laws and what are we talking about when we say the law.
Sorry that you interpreted it as me saying this is a Kate question. That was not my intent. I just was using your name, but I do think that we can provide the voting specific laws before the decision-making process, which is not happening today. So,
Lauren, can you restate, because I was multitasking too hard.
Sure.
What were the set of laws that you asked DRVT for?
I asked DRVT for help with the federal laws and the ADA, which I see more in their scope of expertise than ours.
Okay, and then you had said something else about, like, the election commission was working on something?
Our election division.
Okay, yeah. Great. Thank you.
And what we're looking at is a list of, and just to be clear on expectation, is a list of the laws as they are. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because I
then we
would say
may
too
have
that,
recommendations as a Secretary of State of how to change the law, as this working group of how to change the law, you know,
Yeah.
because I am particularly wearing two hats in this
Yeah.
space. I'm chairing this working group, but I also will have a perspective as the Secretary of State as well.
for
Well,
sure.
and just
Yeah.
to
Thank you.
remind, like, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
So
Kate.
as
Sorry.
organizational memory, in July, the Secretary of State's office had shared the Will Sinning memo that went out that specifically said that the Secretary of State's office believed that electronic voting and hybrid participation was not allowable. And so I know in that meeting, I think I heard Jenny say that that is maybe not what the Secretary of State's office believes now. And so it's really imperative to kind of get an understanding of like, where y'all at now, so that we can move forward.
I understand that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the same thing, that as a relative newcomer to this group, it just would help. Like, I like a framing, like which exact things are we talking about? And it's been hard to pin down because we've been talking about so many different broad topics that's really helpful. Thank you.
Susan, and then Frank, and then Megan.
Yeah, Lauren, thanks. And I just wanted to check, you mentioned, kind of breezed over the question of decision making, and we don't obviously have to decide that now if that's not what we're doing today. But I'm wondering what, at some point we need to decide what is the process for, you know, what goes in and what doesn't, like what is the decision making process, whether we have, you know, if we have consensus, great. If we don't have consensus, how is that represented in the report?
So, and I'm sorry that I breezed over it. That was is bound to happen.
Critique.
So the thought process is, let's get through best practices and as much of the non-annual meeting as we can, because I'm hearing the request for the laws before we engage in substantial discussion on annual meeting. Let's get through as much as we can of this spreadsheet. And then the ask is that everyone take one of these and notate before, in between meetings, notate on the things that we do not talk about there. And we're going to send this to everybody who is not here as well. The concerns or supports or considerations for each topic. And then we will collect that. We really should not be emailing it collectively to each other. And then for decision making, that we will use the assigned members of the working group, which we have, and those members will engage in a conversation of, do we have consensus or substantial consensus? Do we not have consensus? And regardless, unless it's something that the whole group deems as not necessary to go into the report, my intent is that we would have things that were debated and without consensus formed, talked about in the report, as well as things that we have consensus on, because that is reflective of the work that we've done. And also, to be clear, and we've talked about this a little bit, unless anyone objects, I think this report substantially will be written by the Secretary of State with review by everybody. Frank, and then Megan.
Along Kate's discussion of creating the guardrails, I think, which you're looking at, I think that the open meeting law bringing up some of the guardrails basically, and what traffic passes between those guardrails regarding discrimination and inclusion and things like this gets into discrimination law. That may be something that another committee in the legislature should be handling, and along with the open meeting law, where the open meeting law doesn't have the penalties for the open meeting law from the technical faux pas that might happen along the way that means training and that type of thing. But where there's blatant discrimination going on, then I think it moves up the seriousness level in the law, where that potentially the Attorney General might take it more seriously if it's in that category, as opposed to just some complaint about somebody couldn't run the meeting correctly or something like this, and it needs training. So I think it needs to be split apart into that more serious line of questioning relative discrimination that Kate and others have brought up, and the technical side where people just need training and all that stuff. That really should not be a penalty incorporated with that. But if it's straight up discrimination, obviously it's serious. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Megan.
I think I was just trying to get some clarity about what Kate was asking for in terms of the laws. Was that specifically referring to annual meetings?
Yes. Annual meetings. There was a meeting in July. I'm not sure if that's one of the ones where the video recording didn't work, but this has come up a few times where we have asked specifically the Secretary of State's office to compile a list of all of the laws and statutes that are, that are often cited about why towns have been told to stop doing virtual voting or why they're told they can't do virtual voting. And at one point, I think we were told, maybe it was Mark who had mentioned it. I'd asked, like, well, how many laws? And he said, I don't know, like dozens, 40, maybe even 50. And so in order for us to move forward on these charges, I don't know especially how we can do like 3 of them without understanding what these laws are on the books as is, as well as recent interpretations and guidance issued about them by the Secretary of State's office, like the Wilsoning memo to towns.
Okay, so specifically, it's not regarding regular municipal meetings and the open meeting law.
Well,
it's mainly annual meeting.
It might though, because I think the aspect of voting virtually also impacts elected members of that body also voting electronically or virtually with virtual participation. So it may be, depending on how those laws are being viewed, it may actually impact broader municipal meetings as well.
Okay. And then is that something that we might note on this spreadsheet that we might say we want more, need more understanding of the law? Is that something rather than just yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, we could definitely put that in the considerations, and the Secretary of State has been planning to provide that compendium of the elections law. It just wasn't ready for last week to be sent to this group, so we can commit to doing that, and particularly around elections law for annual meeting and the different voting modalities for elections, and open meeting.
Your hope on this.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm interrupting. That's classic.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
For open meeting, the statutes are relatively short. Jenny just shared them in the chat, and we have a lot of guidance on our website. So, and I would ask that people look at there.
Okay. And just one final clarification is your hope on this, and maybe you're going to get into this in more detail. Your hope is not that we say yes, no, maybe, but we notate, we make comments on each of these things. Is that right?
That is my hope for today,
Okay.
and that is my hope for the work that everyone does in the interim between this meeting and the next meeting, because we are going to do our best to move quickly through this list together. I've asked Jenny to help me with timekeeping because we now have an hour and 10 minutes of working time. So I want to use our time as best we can and get to as many topics as we can. Kate.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to add on to what Megan had shared about putting the elections and open meeting laws as a chart in there, I would also, I would want to make sure that we also have state and federal civil rights laws and the 2 articles of the Constitution I keep mentioning. It feels relevant. So I just want to make sure that we're not upholding one and not the other. Do we feel like we need to wait for disability rights to share those laws? I'm assuming you all at the Secretary of State's office know those just as well, or are you wanting to wait for Lindsay and Laura to be able to share those?
I would like to consult with them. I think that would be prudent to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay. Are we ready? So I'm on, well, there's no way that you will see. I'm on the third table, which is the chart related to best practices guide. And the first piece of information that we talked about, and does everyone have a copy of this chart? I'm going to assume that everyone has it in front of them and is working off of that, unless I hear otherwise.
Yes, but can you share page numbers?
I did not put page numbers on it, so that is a failing of mine.
Oh, I mean, it's an Adobe document, though. If you could just say like page number, or you have it hard copy?
I have it hard copy because I'm on my laptop, so I don't have a page number. I don't know. Kelly or Jenny, can you look at the Adobe and see if you can find the page number that we're on?
I'm looking at it on emails, and my email shows me page numbers.
Great.
Great. Cool. Share.
May I ask
Well,
someone to forward the chart to me, please, in the email?
I'm sorry, who just made that request?
Diana Vachon?
Thank you, Diana. Yes.
It's my first time here and I'm just trying to catch up.
Yeah, appreciate that. Diana, can you introduce yourself to this group because you are new? And Jessica, if you don't mind introducing yourself as well, that would be great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Vachon. I am the Shelburne Town Clerk and just here to hear what's going on and figure out how we can support the group. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Jessica?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Radford, she, her pronouns. I'm a senior staff attorney at the ACLU of Vermont, just joined the ACLU of Vermont. And I'm also here just listening in. And apologies for being a little bit late. I had another meeting that I ran over.
We're happy to have you here. Kelly or Jenny, do you have the page numbers by any chance?
I think it's page 15 is where it's starting on best practices.
Yes.
The guiding principles is the first term on there.
Yes.
Is that where we are?
Yes. Thank you.
Where are we?
It's the guiding principles page, which would be page 15 if you count through.
Come over,
That
Dennis.
way.
Little printed copy.
I think actually we want to be on page 14 by that, which is the goals for the best practices
Oh, the
guide.
goals for the best practices guide. Yes, so actually it's page 14. Goals for best practices guide is the top.
And the intent of putting these here in the format that they are is just to, these are things that we talked about in that initial meeting about best practices or promising practices that we wanted to keep in mind as we were talking about the topic. So we made note of the goals for a best practices guide. And I just want to make sure that we are all as aligned as we can be about the goals, which what works best for people? Would you like me to read them or would you like to read them yourselves? I will read the first one. To emphasize both democratic quality and democratic quantity and democratic quality, The second was to make clear legal baselines for accessibility, best practices standards right on top, and do not conflate the two. To highlight and create choices, provide an assortment of options, and note what is crucial. To focus on universal design with additional process for accommodating folks who have additional needs. That we talked about that we may need to balance and navigate competing inclusion needs, for instance, masks and screen sharing and seeing faces. We need to elevate the options for meeting modalities so that towns realize that they have more options, and acknowledge that there's tensions sometimes between effective and inclusive, and recognize community size. Those were the things that we had originally talked about as things that we should be aware of. Does anyone have any gut reactions to that? I would assume that we don't have existing resources per se on any of those things, but does anyone have any gut reactions, considerations, or thoughts?
I'd love to hear more about the second one. I'm not sure I understand it.
That making clear legal baselines for accessibility, that one. I think that is essentially your ask for the laws, Kate. So making sure that everyone is clear at all levels what is legally required by the constellation of laws that you're asking for. And then making clear that while we are providing this best practices guide, that that the it has seemed, and we talked about this at this first meeting, that sometimes people take best practices and will say, oh, I don't need to do that, which is something that they're legally required to do because it's a best practice. Or someone will have a best practice and say somebody is legally required to do that. That goes in both directions, that the difference of what's legally required and what is best practice need to be clear. And we need to be encouraging everybody, obviously, to be doing best practice. But what the understanding of what is legally required versus what is best practice needs to be clear.
And then I had a request that we change the language for it's not an inclusion need, it's an access need. So if we could use the word access need, or access is more universal, accommodation is specific to certain populations, but everyone has access needs. So I'm not sure what we were going for there. If truly universal, it would be access needs. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one down, may need to balance and navigate competing access needs. Although I'm not, I'm confused by the examples, but yeah. And then the very last one, and then I'll mute myself, is I know it's been raised several times, this acknowledging tensions between effective and inclusive. And I again would like to reiterate that is actually maybe not a tension. It's just a misunderstanding of how we do things, because inclusive is effective.
Well, and specifically what we were talking about with that was, the use of Robert's rules or the limiting of public comments. So it wasn't specific to, at that moment, it wasn't specific to accessibility. It was more talking about who has the space to talk and when, because the best practices covers all of that topic as well. Are there any, oh, Susan, yeah.
Well, I don't remember exactly that moment, but I remember the conversation. And I think that whole effective and inclusive is one of the things that we're supposed to be talking about a lot in this meeting. And I think the tension is also, I mean, I think the things that you just said are true. And in addition, it can be true that yes, absolutely, that's the nature of a polarity, is that they're two good things, and that we need them both, and they do feed on each other, but they are in tension. For example, a hybrid meeting is very inclusive, and it can also add a lot of tension around the effectiveness of the meeting, unless you account for microphones, unless you account for making sure everybody has good internet access. So there's a tension there in making it inclusive. It raises the bar in being able to make the work of the meeting effective. If it was just two people sitting at a table, that would be more effective, but far less inclusive. So that I think that's the tension that we're talking about.
Is there anything that needs to be added in this section?
I don't want to belabor this, but is there talking going on that or somewhere that I should be listening to? I'm sorry, I was hearing sound. Elevating the options for meeting modalities so that towns realize that they have more options. Sometimes we talk about, I mean, this is basically about public meetings, but one of the ways to make meetings work better is to have inclusion throughout the year, is to have towns have inclusion throughout the year. And sometimes it's not meetings. Sometimes it's tabling at an event so that people can learn. Sometimes it's communication and outreach ahead of time so that people can understand. And so I just wonder if instead of elevate the options for meeting modalities, for engagement modalities is my suggestion.
That's a good note. Just to be clear, Kelly is keeping notes on our discussion today, so that's how we're managing that. Kate, and then Megan.
Yeah, thank you. And I've raised this a few times, and it does feel like it does elevate to the level of a best practice guide for me, is the recognition that democracy is not inexpensive. There are a lot of costs with democracy, particularly town meeting, that towns have always borne. It's the cost of elections and democracy. So it is not by virtue of the democracy and the local elections that we want and desire as Vermonters. I think just acknowledging that it's not effective, actually, right? Like this is like maybe one of the most ineffective means of decision making ever when we look at like efficiency. And it's what we want, right? So it's not cheap. It's not maybe the most effective or efficient, but this is what we want as Vermonters, as laying the groundwork, because I think too often these polarities do get pushed like, well, we want inclusion, but it's expensive, or we want to be able to do this, but we don't have the training. But I think just a reiteration of what we all want as Vermonters from our local engagement would be super great to have in this report.
Very anticipated. That's basically in the way that we've been talking about it, our introduction, our executive summary, and our conclusion. So yes. Megan.
Oh, did you say my name?
I did.
Okay, thanks. It would be helpful for me if this could be a full sentence goals for best practices guide, because I'm losing the thread of, is this a best practices guide for annual meetings, for open meetings, and then just on the same thing, existing resources and needs to be created. Could you just give an example of one of those to help me understand how we would frame that?
Sure.
Thanks.
So as we get further in the chart, for instance, there's resources for holding a successful hybrid meeting. There are significant resources out there for how to hold a hybrid meeting. I think there's likely some elements that our group has talked about that are not in any of those guides. So our intent, we're supposed to create a best practices guide is to not write a best practices guide that covers the entire universe, but instead to talk about these are the things that we found as core that people need to understand how to run hybrid meetings. These are the resources that we want to point people to and have a centralized hub. And I'm thinking this would live on the Secretary of State's website. Obviously, I would ask that the MCTA and the League all work together to promote it. But it would be a space where we are providing a collection of everything that is currently available, plus some anecdotes about things that are not in the guides and that need more explanation, which is why it needs to be created, is there.
So the goals for best practices guide is for running open meetings, inclusive democracy.
This page that we're on right now is about what do we collectively see as the goals for and sort of our basic underpinnings for creating the best practices guide.
But I know, but what, I'm sorry, but is that for running annual meetings or for meeting the open meeting law? Is it for?
The
Megan?
majority
Go
of
ahead.
these things are for every type of municipal activity.
Okay, so, okay.
So Megan,
great.
Kate just posted in the chat our charge. And if you look at that, and I can read it aloud if that would help anyone. Our charge includes specifically that we recommend best practices for, and then there's a list A through D.
Oh, thank you
And
for that.
A
Yeah.
is kind of what you're referencing, Matt, which is running effective and inclusive meetings, maximizing participation and accessibility in electronic, hybrid and in-person annual meetings and meetings of public bodies. So it's all of that plus the additional list involving universal design for
Got
both of those annual meetings of public bodies, open meeting law training, and then the recording piece. And I think the training public bodies for compliance with open meeting law is one of the examples where there are a crazy amount of existing resources, and we might have additional suggestions for things that are not represented in those resources.
Okay, thank you. I was a little lost as to where we're at. So I just read through these this morning. So thank you. And would there be a point at some point where we break it down into those A, B, C,
Yes.
D, and E? Okay. And okay.
Frank, and then if possible, I'd like to move us to the next page.
Yes, on the category it says elevate options for meeting modalities so the towns realize they have more options. That's a mouthful. What is meeting modalities? And is this going to be a broad set of options or a narrow set of options? It's kind of really open-ended.
Yeah, I think we talk about that a lot more on the next page, and then also further up in the spreadsheet, we talk about, should all open meetings be required to be hybrid? Should there be a statewide platform? There's a lot of pieces that we have talked about related to meeting modalities, but here in the best practices guide, I think the goal of this group and the charge of this group is to help towns know the options available to have a more diverse range of meeting types, specifically looking at how that could improve accessibility. And we've talked about, hybrid meetings and, remote voting or hybrid annual meetings. So we've talked about quite a few.
And
Frank, I'm going to suggest we move on yes, and I think we mentioned engagement instead of meetings to broaden that range, but I'm going to suggest we move on to the next page, just in the interest of time.
Okay.
So these were the guiding principles, and to be clear, these were the sort of bullets or sentiment that I would intend to put at the beginning of this guide that we are creating. These are and should be, I think what the best practices guide would say are this should be the intent of a town, of a meeting, of a group who's having an open meeting. So the things that we talked about there was that bodies adopt an inclusivity statement as a baseline, that and name that civic spaces should be free from discrimination and harassment, that there's protection of third spaces, that there's the opportunity to participate in informal volunteerism, and that arts and culture are celebrated. That people, and I should just say these are not put in any particular order of importance, just to be clear, that people who want to participate can or are able to, that a culture is created of interest and inclusion and make interfaces easier, so that people know how to participate. Follow an inclusion process to invite and incorporate community input into the vision and goals for a municipality. Create a committee dedicated to inclusion and accessibility. Have a town accessibility guide, and create a committee dedicated to democracy, specifically quantity and quality. So those are recommendations to a community of how to be, or how to start to look at how to be more accessible. Susan.
Yeah, I think this is a great list. I think I remember this conversation. I would love to see, I really appreciate the emphasis on just being very clear about discrimination, harassment, accessibility, inclusivity. I also want to make sure that, for example, the inclusivity statement, I would love to see it be effective and inclusive. I mean, towns should be saying, we want our meetings to be worth attending. We want our meetings to be great, and we want everybody to have access to them. Not just we want everybody to have access to them. So effective and inclusive, or the democratic breadth and depth, if you like. Which we touch on at the bottom there, where we talk about democratic quantity and quality. But I'd love to see it raised up. And we talk about throughout this. This is I don't know where this shows up, but the idea of having a committee dedicated to inclusion, accessibility, and accessibility is great. And there are some terrific committees that do that. We also talk about a democracy committee. We talk about committees, a town committee that would focus on probably both of those things: democratic quantity and quality. And I'm just, I guess, maybe putting a pin in that to say, well, which are we saying that we think a town should have? It's kind of like you have to have a conservation commission and a planning commission. Do we want to have a DEI committee or and an accessibility and inclusion committee and a democracy and quality committee? I mean, like what, or are we just kind of saying, here are some different ways that towns can do these things? Think about what's right for your town. So that recommendation about a committee is something that I wanted to raise.
Here it's cast as two separate committees, but we can certainly talk about that as a group. And they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think this is a Venn diagram that overlaps significantly. So, Kate, and then Frank.
Thank you. Sometimes I like to be old school and going back to guiding principles and values, and I just am looking at what we have in our Constitution, and I think it sums it up so well as a guiding principle. This is two of them put together, and I'll also put it in chat, but that we believe that we have an indubitable and alienable and indefensible right to reform or alter government, including electing officers and being elected into office. And so that was another, I know that it didn't get reflected in the guide further down, but I do want to bring back up the point that I've made in the past about the importance of people being able to be elected into office, and the petition signatures being a barrier across the board.
It is higher in the document, not in the best practices section, Kate, but it is there. But I do like the idea of, Kelly, if you don't mind just adding a line, reference the Vermont Constitution so that we remember, because I like that quote that Kate just put in the chat. Frank.
Yes, quickly. Created committee to inclusion and accessibility, but really what I think Kate is saying too, as well, is this what we're dealing is compliance. Because if you're having to comply with the ADA, that's the lowest common denominator, and you cannot separate any government entity, no matter if it's decision making or non-decision making, or however you want to word it. It's all going to be a meeting that is going to have to be ADA or compliant. So the options don't exist because it's a compliance of a federal law and potentially echoed into state law, which means that it's not something to make up as you go along or to decide on a group basis. It's going to be complying, which I think Kate would agree with there. And so I don't think there's creating committee to decide dedicated inclusion and accessibility. You can include that, but you're going to have to comply to those levels. And that has to be brought out forefront on the guardrail issue. Thank you.
Yes. I think that goes to the point that we talked about on the previous page of making clear that there is a difference between what is required and what is best practices, and to not conflate the two. But that what is required is always required, and is required of every town, even if they never take up the issue of inclusion at all. It doesn't change the fact that it's still required that they comply with the law. But we'll do our best to make that distinction. I feel like I saw somebody's hand, but not a hand. No? Okay. Anything else that we would want to provide as a guiding principle to somebody reading this guide? Okay. I'm going to move on to tools and resources.
May I jump in, please? I'm
yes,
sorry.
of course, Mohammed. Sorry,
Hello,
I didn't see you.
everyone, and apologies again. I'm at school doing work right now. But I heard a lot of wonderful comments. One thing I noticed I have not heard or seen yet is the word for this, a lexic where some keywords are defined. For example, when we say inclusion, what does it mean in this context?
Yeah. Okay.
I worry about us not including the key jargon definitions. Most of the time, we adult, because we know the meaning, we just tend to brush it off and keep going. But it doesn't mean everyone else understands what we mean by it.
So I think a glossary of key terms is what you're talking
That's
about.
what I needed.
Yes.
Thank you.
We can absolutely work on that.
Exactly.
And I think that should go at the top of this document that we are creating. That makes
Right.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
probably in our report as well.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm moving to resources and tools. These are things that we thought towns need to create themselves. So not resources that we are providing to them, but things that they could provide. And we talked quite a bit about a town welcome manual. We talked about some examples of that, sort of how to operationalize your town. Some towns are using it, different terms for this. Some people are saying welcome, some are saying toolkit, or there's how to make your town work for you manual or guide. And then we talked about communities really making sure that there's universal access to decent broadband, and that communities, to Frank's earlier point, have some self-evaluation in addition to the outside evaluations that occur about the effectiveness of community engagement and public communication efforts, so that there's some quality assurance. And Susan, I see your hand is up. Oh, you're on mute, Susan.
Having had some experience with these manuals, I think something like a user's guide or an operator's manual is a better name than a welcome manual, because it includes everybody, whether you've been there, whether you're with. Basically, it makes less of a division between people who are welcoming you in. It's more of a we are all here together, and not a dividing line. So that's just that's a feedback that we've gotten from seeing different towns use different names. I think
Yep,
something
that
like
makes sense to me.
operators.
And I think I've said there's a lot about my town that I don't know how to operate. So this would be
Exactly.
something that would be
Exactly.
useful to me.
Yes.
And the last thing, it's on the next page, is to consider a variety of information sharing opportunities and different channels of communication. Megan.
We
Megan.
talked a little bit of, sorry. We talked a little bit about towns needing a website. And I know that's been a sticky wicket. And I'm also recognizing that Diana's a clerk and may have some things. There's been some folks that are quiet. So is this where we would put that if we're going to ask people to make a town user manual? Is this where
Yeah.
we would put something like we think in terms of best practices that the legislature would require towns to have websites and provide the resources to make that happen?
That is something, again, that we put higher in this chart, about should that be a policy or legislative or change or a best practice, that towns have websites.
Okay.
And sort of dependent on how that conversation goes, of course, we can put it here as well. If we as a group are recommending as a floor that towns have a website, then I'm not saying that we are going to, but just if we are, then it could be noted in the best practice guide as well, obviously. But as a group, we would also be encouraging the creation of websites, since we're on that topic. Tim.
And your point, Lauren, it's on the pages, it's page 3, the first item under universal design.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Sean.
Hopefully I can begin speaking at some point.
Yeah, I just asked you, Tim.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Good morning. When we mentioned a website, in my limited research, I found that nearly all towns have a website, but some are not official. I think that the language in the recommendation should include a official website plus some minimum items on what it should cover, because just having a website that is out there, you may not get complete information unless there are some standards on what's going to be there.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Megan.
This seems like a good time. In my sense, I mean, I can understand the desire to have some agreement on issues, but also, like when Tim says most towns have websites, that's the kind of information I think would be helpful to provide to the legislature. And I just started compiling the information I have about how VAN serves municipalities, what Vermont League of Cities and Towns surveys say about hybrid meeting access, so that there's again, the snapshot of where we are in time, and then some flags that we put out around universal access. And, there's some flags that we put out there that are both like, this is the law that you have to meet, this is where we want to go, and this is sort of how we might get there. And so I think that that's really, like, I'm very interested to hear Tim say that everybody has one, but, or many people have one, and how do we make sure to say that? So we say, actually, the gap that we need to fill is maybe not as big as we're thinking it is. So,
Yes, sort of the collection of existing resources to inform the legislature on where we are right now. But that still doesn't change, again, assuming that we are in collective agreement that towns should have websites, that doesn't change the fact that this group would be recommending that towns have official websites, and that the official websites has the town report and the open meetings that are happening and the agendas, and we can come up with a list, but
yeah, thank you.
Susan, and then Kate, and then Frank.
Yeah, I think that the idea that if a town has a website, there's some terrific things that can really make it really usable and useful, I think is a good idea, and having those standards. I think the idea of the group recommending that every town have a website, or recommending that the legislature mandate that every town have a website, has a lot of spider webs attached to it that we need to identify, like the current law. And I think Laura mentioned this last time, there's a lot of laws attached to websites that we would need to recognize before I'm sure at least the group I'm representing could say, yeah, great, mandate that, because things like the requirements of really short-term requirements of posting meeting minutes. If you have a website, you have to post the meeting minutes, and you have to post them really fast, which, in theory is a great idea, but requires staffing and things that not every town has. And so unless it comes with money to up the staffing, we have seen that there, some towns that are just like, this is more than we can do. So
Changing the requirements as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Just recognizing, again, like it's a spider web and it has a ping and it has an effect. Let's help towns. If this truly is best practice, we got to help towns do it, because right now some of them don't have the resources.
Kate, and then Frank.
Thank you. And another piece that would be super helpful for best practice for towns, but also to make sure that we include in the report, is that current easy to digest snapshot of how many towns we're actually talking about throughout the state that has at least one or more floor votes, because there's a lot of circumstances and where voters, this is actually very common. Linden, for example, people will say, oh, I'm allowed to vote on everything. I don't need to go to town meeting. They don't realize, because nobody, except for very in small fine print in the town meeting report, there's no voter education that, well, you can elect officers via Australian ballot, and you can also pass a budget via town Australian ballot. But the public options over here are actually floor vote. And so when I know that there is on the website of the Secretary of State's office that very lengthy document, which is very difficult to say X amount of towns do one or more floor votes. I think we need that snapshot for the legislature, because it's actually, when you look at one or more floor votes, it's probably the majority of towns almost, I'm guessing. So that piece of it. The other piece for best practices is warnings in non-paid access points. So a lot of towns will use the paid newspaper for their warnings, especially if they don't have websites. So that needs to be changed as a best practice, that, Front Porch Forum, other places that people can access without paying for it. And then the last one, I know we talked about current laws, but also the curbside ballot laws that are already on the books. There's a lot of confusion from both voters and town officials that is actually a law right now, and that people can go on the same day who did not request their absentee ballot and vote. And so that's another one that I want to make sure we don't miss.
Kelly, I think, can you make sure that that gets added to the election, the floor vote section, the curbside voting for sure?
Yeah.
Thank you. Not saying that it wouldn't be in best practices too, Kate, but I just want to make sure that in the section of the report where we're talking about annual meeting, we talk about curbside voting.
Yeah, I should name what I mean by, so best practice there would be that towns are informing their voters, hey,
Yep.
you don't have to request an absentee ballot. You could also just come and do curbside voting. We're here
Okay.
for you. Here's how you get in touch with us.
Okay.
Kate, can you just clarify? You're saying you want to make sure notices are posted in places where people can get them without having to pay, not.
Yes. So for
Okay.
example, in my
Yeah.
town, we don't have a website. So the only way I can get access to notices is by paying for the Caledonian Record, which I will not do. And so I have no access to anything. You know, we don't even have a post office here. I probably could go inside to an office in the hours, the limited hours that they work and look, but that's not accessible, right? And so this is happening at towns all around the state.
It's an interesting idea to, I'm thinking about how at the same time there is legislative work going on to support local media. And it's an interesting thought to think about having resources to support community members who live in a town to provide them access to their local paper in some way. So, but not to go, it's just, it's making me think about that, right? So if you have to pay for the Caledonia Record and that's your paper of record, why as a community member can't you have access to that? So we can put that in the parking lot, Lauren. We could put that in the parking lot, but I also, as somebody who is aware of the need to support local media that underpins our democracy, whether we agree with it or not sometimes, whether, you know, we love our local papers or not. I think that's there's something interesting there to
And I
dig into.
just want to note that this is an area where the law may need to change because the open meeting law, the notice requirements were written before we had any concept of a website or front porch forum or listserv. I mean, there's a lot of different things that could happen that could be additional to a paper of record or a town hall posting that just were not contemplated when those, I don't even know when those weren't written, but I guarantee it was before all of the options that we have now. Tim.
Just to background you all, not only am I a Hall of Fame radio reporter, I am running a small nonprofit community newsletter for my town right now. And all of the expense that takes is the monthly MailChimp fee. It's available to anybody by email. And I think it's something that could easily be expanded to be available in print at a town hall. There are low-tech solutions out there that don't necessarily include a subscription to the local newspaper, which, by the way, our town does have that, and it's in our library. So there are options out there, and they shouldn't necessarily cost a lot of money.
Frank.
2 points. Number one, following the string here is that in our town, there's an opt-in and the town clerk emails all the notices out to the opt-in list. And it's easy to opt in, very easy. And the second thing is relative to websites is maintenance becomes an issue. Like, for example, I'm the energy coordinator and I've been serving it as for a number of years, but I just went on the website and the website says energy coordinator position is open. And I've told them, I says, you need to change that. And they haven't changed it. We also had a fantastic inclusion statement but it wasn't put in HTML. It was put on a PDF that's very difficult to find. And so you have human beings trying to do their best to manage websites, and they are an art form in a way. And so the best of dreams sometimes are realized. In a perfection world, we have human beings who are not perfect. And so sometimes you don't have this. So sometimes maybe some of these issues, the state may consider there should be some stuff that they really want to get out there. The state create the web pages that can be a hyperlink to the town websites on a particular state-related page or something like this. And then the people can find the state-related important information standardized across the state on that one site that's linked to where it's not under some other heading amongst all the towns in the state, so that there's some organization. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Frank, I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is there is not a significant support of municipalities at the state level unless it's issue specific. So for instance, we as at the Secretary of State really support town clerks around elections, and we are proud to do that. We support them around records, but in terms of websites, that is not something that our office has ever been charged with. It's not something that that is within our scope of jurisdiction at this point. And I think a lot of what I was thinking as you were talking, a lot of what we come up with in this group, the conversations are, well, how does a town get that done? How does a town remember to update their website? How does a town follow the accessibility WAG 2.0 guidelines? Like there's a lot with all of the things that we want towns to do to expand accessibility and access and inclusion for all, the universal design. Are there things that need to be done at a different level than the town level to support those efforts? And how is that done? So that it doesn't feel like some of the things may be state mandates, but some of them are just could be state encouragement or support if and when a town wants that. And I think there's a line there of what should be a mandate because the law needs to change or the requirement needs to change, and what should the state support that may be outside of a single town clerk's knowledge and ability, or a small town's ability to fund, or for, I think you guys hopefully understand what I'm saying, but there are true limits on what is possible for some things, and for some things there's a lot of free, easy solutions as well. So I think we need to name those, and we already have the listserv and the newsletter, but whether or not those become requirements is a different thing. Okay. I'm going to move us on to notice and agenda. We talked a lot about notices and agendas and what should happen on those. And this, just to be clear, is things that are not legally required. This is on top of what's legally required for a notice and agenda at this time. Doesn't mean that the requirements can't change, but these are things that would be best practices, not legal requirements. First and foremost, a notice that encourages people to show up, right? If we care about democracy, the notice needs to be clear, the notice needs to have topics of interest, and the notice should encourage people to come. We talked a lot about having a point person for accommodations. That would be on the notice and the agenda. We talked about providing childcare, and specifically to that, we talked about don't use people who need to vote or participate in the meeting, aka don't rely on the women so that they're precluded from the vote. We talked about providing transportation. We talked about planning ahead to ensure input from a variety of sources and proactively invite participants whose input is needed, so that you can ensure that there's a diverse group and the right group of voices around the table. We talked about having a well-planned agenda, so that you can get through all the topics, which is not happening here today with us, but having a well-organized agenda. Think about the priority of the topics, dependent on public importance and priority, so that the important things don't go to the bottom of the agenda and are held for very last, was something that we talked a lot about. We talked about having plain language, making it as clear as possible, and avoiding jargon and acronyms. Posting all of the materials ahead of time, making clear the purpose of the meeting. You know, is this a decision-making meeting? Is this an exploratory meeting or topic? Ensure that you have the correct interpretation of documents if necessary, and proactive and intentional inclusion of and engagement with marginalized communities, including incarcerated community members and people using hotel vouchers. Kate.
One thing that I think belongs here that got left off is also the requirement. I know a lot of towns already do this. I live in one of the towns that doesn't, where town meeting reports need to be provided ahead of time in alternate formats, including the requirement of electronically. The mailed out 10-point black and white, like grainy, version isn't it. It's not accessible. So I think having a requirement for town meeting report being shared electronically would actually be best practice here. And then also be available in alternative formats, including interpreted and translated. But then the other piece is for town meeting, and specifically, there's oftentimes a litany of presentations and handouts that are being done in the moment. And so those should be shared in advance ahead of time electronically as well, especially for access, interpretation, and translation.
Okay. Kelly, did you get that last piece with post all materials ahead of time, the access piece there? And I think, but I'll have to verify, that providing the town report electronically, that being a requirement, is up higher in the chart and is not under best practices. Again, trying to keep separate what are we recommending as required versus best practices. But I hear you. Susan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we want to differentiate here, between, I mean, some of this stuff is so very widely understood by the field of democratic engagement, like having a well-planned agenda and using accessible language. We can't say it enough. So I'm very happy to see it here. And I also, I think I was the one who mentioned, we've got, some data on that childcare actually does improve participation at town meeting, especially among women. Whether or not you're mandating a town to do it, they should be aware that it's there. I don't know of any data on transportation, and I just don't know if it belongs. I just don't know whether it belongs here or not. And so, anecdotally, our town has offered it for 25 years, and we never get any. But people have I feel like in rural areas have had to figure it out already here. I'm not sure why, but anyway, for whatever reason, I'm not sure. I want to have high quality recommendations, and I want to make sure that we have the research and data and support for the things that we're recommending.
So just on that piece, on the data piece, I certainly think we were charged with talking about transportation. I'm just going to use transportation or childcare as an example. We were tasked to talk about that. Those two topics will be in the body of our report, where we'll talk about the data that you and Andy brought to the table around those two topics. And then in the best practices guide, this is something that a town might want to consider to increase participation. So we may not, I don't know, we have to look at the format. Maybe we'll put in parentheses, evidence has shown that providing childcare increases participation by X% in the best practices guide, but certainly in the body of the report, we'll make sure that data, wherever we can get data, we will put it into our report to help support the report.
Yeah, yeah, just to add to that, I do think that it's helpful, I think, to be aware that in some cases we are saying towns need to do this really, like, if we're going to talk about what goes into the town report, we know who makes town reports. And so we're talking about someone specific, whereas some of these other things are things that might be that accessibility committee, those volunteers on that democracy committee. And so I just maybe, a statement at the top that towns need to figure out, who does what. But I just, I guess I just, the who does what factor is always a tricky one when advice comes down to a body.
Yeah. I think that would be, Kelly, the definition of roles or assigning of roles might be something that we want to put in the guiding principles for best
Could be
practices.
like a flow chart.
Yeah. The towns
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything more related to notice and agendas? Hearing none, I'm moving on to location. We talked about consistent and familiar locations for in-person meetings, to have a plan in place for tech moderation and glitches, to have the correct technology in place, and to have interpreters if necessary. Kate.
Yeah. One of the most frequent things that happens for VCIL peers is they will be told, okay, we're doing it at an ADA accessible space, no worries. And then they get there and no one has the key to the elevator. And this happens all the time. And then they have to wait for like an hour, then nobody can find the key, right? So I think a best practice is also that the day before, that town elections officials, including justices of the peace, have also practiced using all accessibility features of that location.
And I think that we can expand that to open meetings too, not just specific to voting, Kate. So it could be, any time that the public is anticipated to be in the space, the layout and accessibility features should be reviewed by those who will be in charge. That's one thing that I thought was really, re-listening to the recordings was good. One thing that I really loved the idea of was the town accessibility guide, so that towns really know where they are on accessibility, where the elevators are, who has access to the keys, and some of that is for internal use and some of that is for external use, so that the public knows without having to ask, is this building accessible to me? They should be able to see that building is not accessible to me, as should the town official who's scheduling a meeting there. That is not an accessible building, right? So and should not have a meeting scheduled there. But I thought that was a great idea. That's my 2 cents. I'm speaking as the Secretary of State there, and not as a facilitator of this meeting. I just really love that idea. Kate, is that a lingering hand or a new thought?
It is, yeah. It's one more thing that somebody had brought up that I thought was a great best practice that I don't think made it in. And that it may be more specific to town meeting, but it could be all, because most of these locations only have 1 or 2, just a handful of accessible spots, parking spots. Somebody brought up the best practice of having valet service would be phenomenal.
Okay. Frank.
On the accessibilities and the translators, you get into the digital world versus the analog world there, whether or not there's a requirement. And we haven't really explored the digital options in hand here. Some people have. I'm still confused about it because I haven't seen this. I know a friend of mine who works in that area, and he communicated to me, and I sent this out on a person, Lisa Penny, who's a disability rights person in Maine. And she's in, as a picture with that email I sent out of her in a booth with all these electronic gadgets for 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 translating and communicating to people who are hard of hearing, etc. And so I'm seeing that other states are fully endorsing this, and I'm wondering, where is Vermont going to be, and should the legislative committee examine that and have people in particular on this, because that will be enormous cost savings, because the manpower to go out and do this for 250 entities with 3 potential sub-entities across the state happening within a month of meetings, maybe condensed in a week or so. I don't think you have the manpower physically, manpower wise, to get it out there, especially in bad weather. If we can zoom in if it's required to do hybrid, but still you might not have the manpower. So some of these digital connected to the meeting gadgets may be 99% effective. I don't know, but that certainly needs to have a thorough investigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan. And then Megan.
Having trouble. Okay, here it is. Yeah, we talk about consistent and familiar location for these meetings, and I'm wondering if that's the right wording. I think what we're really talking about is accessible and welcoming. For a number of reasons, I think that towns and municipal bodies sometimes meet in different places, and different ones can be sort of culturally welcoming to different groups. And by sticking with just one, and the one that means the law, or the one that means school, and I always hated school, or the one that means, can tend to exclude. And so the idea of having, if a town's lucky enough to have multiple venues, the idea of that, I think is good, not to accidentally say they shouldn't do that. No, it has to be consistent. And also, I don't know if this is the place or not. Probably not. We're talking about location, but I do want to kind of bang the drum about how not all engagement needs to be meetings, and not all engagement needs to have a location. Sometimes it's going to be a survey. Sometimes it's going to be you go to them and have one-on-one. So it'll come up elsewhere, but yeah.
Well, I think we don't specifically call it out on this chart. So I think we can add a line here just so we remember that there's multiple methods of engagement, and that open meeting and public meetings is one, obviously annual meeting, and Australian ballot is another in the election space, but there's a lot of opportunities to engage outside of that very much more formal structure.
Very much so, and throughout the year, so that there can be different welcoming moments throughout the year.
Mohammed.
Thank you.
Sorry, Megan. Megan, I'm sorry.
Megan, go ahead. It's okay. Please, Megan, go ahead.
Captioning, where would we put captioning and Van Crow, making sure towns have a relationship in place with Van Crow? I think one of the things when people hear, I'd like an interpreter. Well, I've had that experience where I was in a meeting and somebody said, oh, maybe should I ask for an interpreter? And my first thought was, oh my God, it's going to be so expensive. And then I was like, oh, it's not. And so where do we put that in there? Like have that relationship set up, and then there are best practices around technology use, and make sure that Zoom meetings are set up ahead of time with captioning enabled, that you explain that process. I don't know how in the weeds we get with each of the,
Yeah, I think that's we should put that in the format of the meeting because that's preparing for what we talked about, which is that meetings are hybrid. And so as part of that, if you're holding a hybrid meeting, you should practice the tech before the meeting.
Yeah,
That
but
very
maybe-
last piece of your spot and the interpreters, I feel like, and captioning, I feel like well, it's in location, but we can make that more clear as well. Okay, I'm going to move to format of the meeting since we're sort of getting there anyway, if that's okay. The things that we talked about there were that all meetings are hybrid. That's a best practice. Matching the purpose of the meeting with the process that is being used in the meeting. That was something that Susan talked a lot about, sort of in line with what she's talked about today, like to not have the same very rigid structure if the topic doesn't demand that. Have a point person for handling the technology that's going to be used. And I think we should add practice the technology. And I just want to say formally, I'm very sorry that we failed to effectively record our last meeting and record all meetings for people who can't attend or need tech assistance. So those were for format of the meeting, the things that came out. Anything to add there? Okay, I'm moving on to meeting structure and community norms.
Lauren, we have Susan.
Sorry, Susan, I didn't see
Sorry.
you.
No problem. I just I just know that this whole idea of all meetings being hybrid are problematic, and I just want to start it. We'll be talking about it later.
Yes.
I know. So it's gonna have to have support. So by calling it best practice, it's problematic. We'll talk about it more.
Okay. Frank, and then
A
Kate.
footnote to that is that, again, the guardrails that Kate was describing under the ADA and all this other stuff, once you do it and once it's done, then is it a question where you pull back from doing that? Is that pulling away someone's rights to access? And I think that this is going to have to be boiled down and standardized and made so simple to use that there is no excuse not to do it somehow. And that's going to have to be the legislature that's going to have to dive deep into that with potentially some testimony and hands-on themselves relative to that topic. Because it's going to be them who have a feeling towards this as to whether anything will evolve in that direction. Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you. So yeah, well, one thing is I want to reiterate, I know we're talking about, we will say that these are the things that are required before we get into the best practices. And I also wonder if when we're going through, when we do reiterate things that are required as a best practice, if we just say, and also this is required by law. But the other thing that I wanted to share is when we talk about recording meetings, like this is sort of an example, like, yes, that's a best practice, and it's still required to also have meeting minutes for that recorded meeting. And so just adding those caveats where those caveats should be so that, meeting conveners aren't like, well, it's recorded, you could watch the 2-hour video. Good luck with that. We have the meeting minutes.
Agreed. Mohammed.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit, 4 minutes back, referring to Susan's comment about accessibility in locations. I was thinking of if folks chose to have only one building or are used to have a meeting in a one specific building, they could ultimately try to rotate in different areas, and or because we mentioned hybrid, some folks possibly those who would need interpretation. They could even be in different locations with their specific interpreter and be on the screen. It all allows accessibility as well. A lot of flexibility and possibilities to do that, and even transportation, because some people may not be driving and or have no means to drive. So it just helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny, we're at time.
We are at time.
And can you just remind me the meetings that we have that are scheduled are when?
Let's find out our next one here.
And while she's looking that up, I have an accessibility request. When the meeting agenda is attached to the Outlook calendar, which is best practice, it's great. A lot of people don't get notice of it, and people who have declined meetings don't actually get it either. So like I know Laura wasn't able to be here. So I'm just wondering if we could also get separate emails as work group members for when the materials are available. That would be really helpful.
Sure.
And so our next scheduled meeting is Thursday, October 9th from 10 to 11:30. So 2 weeks, same time slot. And then we have another one 2 other weeks out. So 2 more weeks out on October 23rd, same time slot, Thursday, 10 to 11:30. So we have 2 more meetings set every 2 weeks for Thursdays at this time.
Okay. I can't make this decision on the fly without looking at calendars and talking to folks, but I think it's possible that we might need more meetings. Just how the depth and breadth and richness of our conversation today shows that we may need more meetings. But I know that we can't do a meeting next Thursday or Friday. So in the interim, please work through this chart, be familiar with this chart so that we can move through the topics as efficiently as possible, understanding that there's going to be times where we need to spend more time on any particular topic. But in 2 weeks, we'll pick back up where we are, which is the meeting structure and community norms. And I'm sorry, I don't know which page I'm on because I'm not looking at the Adobe. But then the intent would be thank you, Sean. But then we would intend to go to the top of this document, would be our next approach. Susan.
Well, I'm just wondering if a way to make these meetings maybe a little more efficient on this particular process would be to go through, have our homework between now and the next meeting, like you said, go through and maybe rank basically each of us marks, is this acceptable? I agree, or this is only acceptable with these changes, or this is unacceptable and here's why. And submit those to the Secretary of State. You guys collate them so that when we arrive at the meeting, there might be some stuff we can skip. There might be some stuff where you say, oh, this was acceptable to all, or this was acceptable to all except with these changes, and so that we can identify the things that we actually need meeting time for to talk about. It's just one possible way to use the time between meetings.
So Susan, just so I'm clear on what you're suggesting, and it might mean that we need to send out a modified chart, would be that in the considerations section that we're asking people to fill out sort of what are you, do you strongly support this? Do you have any concerns? Are you opposed to this? Like, what are the things that need to be taken into consideration? You are saying to put a ranking or to put a number or clear indicator of I support this or I don't.
I mean, it's an indicator of consensus. It seems to me that what you're looking for is some kind of consensus, and when there isn't consensus, we want to know what are the issues.
That is
what
true.
Are the issues.
Yeah. Okay.
And it just might speed things along. And if you're doing that anyway, you might want to look at clumping some of these. Some of the items are could be clumped, but that's your call.
Frank, and then I'm going to close this meeting.
Some of those might be able to rank between 1 and 10 to get a sense of the degree of support for it or not. I think
I'm going to make it narrower than 10, Frank, but we'll have some indicator of support or consensus, like that you believe that this should be a consensus, to Susan's point. So yes, Jenny, and then Kate.
Just to address the two questions that were posed in the chat. We are compiling in-house all of the information and resources that folks have shared right along the way. So we are in the process of getting that all into one place for us. Hopefully that will be useful both for discussion, but for resource checking when we are writing the report, but also as resources to include in the report too. And then Kate, the plans to address 2 through 8. This chart is representative of the whole. We obviously didn't get through the whole chart, but this plan, I think we're going to be continuing to address all of these items, both when folks go through this themselves, return to us, we compile, and at our next meetings.
And then just to reiterate, because we haven't done this in the past, the changes that we named, Kelly did write those down. We will be getting a new chart with additional areas because Kelly or someone in the SOS's office took that down. So like in the next few days, we'll be getting that so that we can start going through that with the updates.
So Kate, here's my thought on that. Because we want to be able to turn around any documents for a meeting by next Thursday, my recommendation is people work with the one that they have here. There's spaces on here for adding things, but know that everything that was stated today, and I think Kelly's jotting it down, I plan to also go back through, that will be represented in our next round of whatever we issue out. But I would say work from this. If you want to add to what you stated in the meeting today, or people did, and riff on that in your document that you're going to send back to us, that would be great. We also will make sure those things that were said today get in there for next round.
Megan.
Thanks. I know you're trying to get out. I have.
I'm trying to get us all out.
Yeah. I did, early on in this working group, I know Susan and Andy and Frank and I met. I began compiling some information from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and VAN around hybrid meetings, best practices, etc. Is it still useful? And I'm working on compiling that into an essay with some graphs, etc. Is that still useful information, and should I be sharing that, and how should I share that?
Yes is the answer. And to Jenny is the place.
Okay.
And I think the graphs and the data are probably the most important. That the essay component, yes, but I would say the graphs and the data are the very most important.
Okay.
And we talked about which towns had websites and things like that as well. So if you could add that, if you do have that already, or if the league does.
I don't have that information, but I'm
Does the
interested to
SOS
hear
have
that.
it?
So yeah,
I think we have pieces of it, but not a comprehensive. And I think that the league has pieces of it, but is not comprehensive. So
yeah,
I think we've talked about this in the past. The challenge we have is not all town clerks respond to the surveys that the Secretary of State puts out. We have about a 60% response rate on any given survey. And the league also does a survey and has similar challenges in having communities respond. So we have a sense, but we don't have a comprehensive list by any means. So I just want to make sure that people know that. But I think between our two resources, that question has been asked. And Sean, that question was asked on our most recent survey to town clerks, right?
Yeah.
And that could be included as part of the snapshot. Is that we have this information and, certainly the data that I have and have provided has rounded edges.
Yeah, and we'll have to state the failings of our data collection as well, or the limitations on the data collection. I don't want to say failings. We're making our best. We have asked for this information repeatedly over the course of time. We just people don't all respond. So.
And I assume when you're talking to the League of Cities and Towns, you're talking to those great folks over there who are staff. Not,
Yes.
I don't know anything about this stuff.
No.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we share our surveys with them and vice versa.
I've just gotten my material off their website.
Yeah. We do our best to collaborate with them on that type of information as much as possible. Great. Well, thank you. I hope this felt productive and like we have a goal moving forward. We look forward to hearing from you guys, and we'll work on this again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Sean, does the elections department thing on the floor voting in-person town meetings